Welcome back to the Ultimate Trumpet Podcast. I'm Adam.
And I'm Bella. Today's episode is based on an article from trumpetstudio.com by Michael Droste. And Adam, I have to say, this one has some teeth in it.
It really does. The title is The Cult of the High F, Why Screaming Range Is Overrated. And I want to start with the very first line of the article because I think it does more work than anything else in the piece. He writes that nobody has ever walked into his studio and asked him how to play a beautiful phrase. They ask about the high F.
And that lands, doesn't it? 40-some years of teaching, hundreds of students, and the opening question basically never changes. It shows up in different costumes. I'm stuck at high C, my range plateaued. Should I try a shallower mouthpiece? What do you think about this method book? But underneath, it's always the same question. How do I get higher?
Not how do I sound better. Not how do I play more in tune. Not how do I stop rushing or how do I make a room go quiet on a ballad. Just higher.
And what I appreciate about the article is that it doesn't sneer at that. Michael Droste is very clear that he was 17 once, too. He had a Maynard record, and he wanted what Maynard had. That's not a character flaw. That's a completely normal reaction to hearing something thrilling.
Right. The argument isn't that wanting range is bad. The argument is that somewhere along the way, wanting range turned into a belief system, and belief systems do a kind of damage that ordinary wanting doesn't.
So let's talk about where it came from, because he's careful here too. This didn't come from nowhere, and it didn't come from fools. The screaming lead trumpet is genuinely one of the most exciting sounds in all of music. When Maynard sat on top of a Kenton chart or when Cat Anderson floated above the Ellington band, something happened in the room that nothing else in the orchestra could do.
And that's real. He's not pretending otherwise. He even points out he'd be a hypocrite if he did, since he spent volunteer hours building a tribute site for Maynard because he thinks that contribution deserves preserving.
So if the sound isn't the problem, what changed?
The delivery system. That's the heart of it. Back in 1965, you heard the high note as the climax of a 4-minute arrangement, after the shout chorus, after the build, in context. And you understood without anybody explaining it that the note was the end of something. It was earned by everything that came before it.
And now you get the note by itself. 14 seconds, vertical video, no chart, no band, no context, no ballad, no sight reading, no downbeat, no bandstand. Just the note and a little number in the corner counting the likes.
Which means an entire generation of young players has formed its picture of trumpet excellence from a medium that can only show one dimension of it. And it happens to be the loudest, shortest, most easily measured dimension.
Okay, this is the line from the article that I keep coming back to. He says range is the only thing about trumpet playing that can be scored like a video game. You either got the F or you didn't.
Whereas sound is subjective, phrasing is subjective, time feel is subjective. Intonation actually requires a second player in the room to even evaluate. But range is a leaderboard, and human beings will always chase the number they can see.
So the cult isn't really about the notes at all. It's about the leaderboard.
That's exactly the diagnosis. And once you see it that way, the rest of the article follows pretty naturally, because the next section is about what range actually is. And this is the part he says the range method salesmen don't want in the brochure.
Range is not a skill. Range is a symptom.
Say that again for the people in the practice rooms.
Range is a symptom. It's what shows up on the outside when the air, the aperture, the tongue level, the ear, and the resonance of the instrument are all cooperating efficiently. You don't build range directly any more than you build a fever directly. You build the conditions, and the range shows up as evidence that the conditions are right.
And this is where the Chicago lineage comes in, which is the tradition Michael Droste comes out of. Arnold Jacobs spent an entire career explaining this to brass players from every corner of the world, and he never once framed it as a strength contest, song and wind. You conceive the sound, you move the air, and the body organizes itself around the intention.
The lips vibrate faster because the air is moving faster, and the aperture is more efficient. Not because you squeezed harder, and not because you pressed the mouthpiece into your face until your teeth ached.
Which takes us right into the mechanism that actually breaks people. Because here's the trap. When a player decides that range is a goal instead of a symptom, they have to produce the note today. They can't wait 18 months for efficiency to develop, because 18 months is not a satisfying answer to a 17-year-old with a leaderboard in his pocket.
So they reach for the tools that produce a result immediately. And the article names 3 of them.
Number 1 is mouthpiece pressure. Push the rim into the lips hard enough, and you will artificially shorten the vibrating surface and get a higher pitch. You will also restrict blood flow to the exact tissue you need for the next 4 decades of your life.
Number 2 is global tension. Clamp the corners, clench the jaw, tighten the throat, brace the neck. And it works. Once, for a few notes. And then it stops working, and the only option left is more of it.
Number 3 is air pressure without airflow. Compressing a big volume of stagnant air behind a closed aperture instead of actually moving air. It feels powerful. He describes it as basically a Valsalva maneuver with a trumpet attached.
And every one of those produces a note, which is exactly why it's a trap. If they didn't work at all, nobody would do them.
They work, they get reinforced, and the player builds an entire physical architecture on top of a shortcut. And then, somewhere around 24, the architecture starts to fail, and the player has no idea why, because they were doing the thing that got them results the whole time.
So let's talk about the wreckage, and I want to note that he's careful here. He says plainly that he's a trumpet teacher and not a physician, and anybody dealing with real physical symptoms needs a real doctor, ideally one who works with musicians.
Good caveat. But he's watched the pattern enough times to describe it, and he lays out 4 grades of it.
The mildest one is the plateau that never breaks. This player has been at almost a high F for 6 years, 4 mouthpieces, 3 method books. And here's the part that stings. Their sound in the staff has quietly gotten worse the entire time, and nobody has told them, because they only ever record the high notes.
The middle version is chronic overuse, swollen chops that never quite recover, a warm-up that takes 90 minutes and only sort of works, a bad day that becomes a bad week that becomes a bad semester, and players in this category often stop taking gigs because they can't predict whether their face is going to show up.
The severe version is the one nobody wants to name. Torn tissue, nerve problems, focal dystonia. And he's appropriately humble about that one, noting the mechanism still isn't fully understood, but that it's consistently associated with high repetition, high tension, high anxiety practice, which, as he points out, is a precise description of range obsession.
And then he says something that stopped me cold. He's known excellent players who lost the ability to play at all, and not one of them lost it while working on Clark studies at mezzo piano.
Then there's the 4th version, which isn't an injury at all, and might be the most common of the 4.
The player who is completely healthy, has a legitimate double G, and cannot get hired.
Because they can't play a ballad. Because their sound in the middle of the horn is thin and edgy and doesn't blend with anybody. Because they never learned to read a chart at tempo. Because their time is bad. Because they spent 7 years practicing the top of the horn, and the top of the horn is roughly 4% of the music that exists.
And there's no medical name for that one. That's just a career that didn't happen.
Which brings us to what does get you hired, and I love that he answers this from his own working life rather than from theory. 50 years of playing, and what did it actually consist of? Weddings, church services, big band books, and mostly not the lead book, pit orchestras, recording sessions, community orchestra, funerals, corporate parties and hotel ballrooms where nobody is listening, chamber brass, teaching.
And then the question. How many times in 50 years has somebody hired him because he could play a high F?
The honest answer being that the high note is a specialty item on a specialty gig.
And he's respectful about this. Lead playing in a big band is a legitimate, difficult, honorable specialization, and the players who do it at a high level have his complete respect. But look at what those players actually are. Wayne Bergeron is a first-call session musician who reads anything put in front of him, plays flugel, plays in tune, and shows up prepared. Arturo Sandoval plays Hummel and Bach. Maynard was in Kenton's section before he was Maynard, and if you go back and listen, the man had a gorgeous sound at every dynamic on every horn he picked up.
The screaming was the cherry. Every one of them built the Sunday first.
That's the line. So here's his actual hiring list, in order of what matters. Sound comes first, and he says it isn't close, a tone people want in the room. Then time, because if your time is bad, nothing else you do can even be used. Then reading, fast, accurate, transposing, first take. Then intonation, especially in a section, especially soft, especially in the staff. Then blend, which he defines beautifully as knowing when to disappear.
Then endurance in the middle register, and he makes a point I think gets missed constantly. 3 hours of first book but not screaming is a much harder physical problem than 8 bars of high F.
Then being someone people want in the van, which he says he cannot overstate. And then somewhere down at the bottom, if it applies to the gig at all, range.
And here's the kicker. 6 of the top 7 things on that list are actively damaged by the practice habits the range cult encourages. Pressure and tension wreck your sound, your intonation, your endurance, and your blend. Time spent screaming into a phone camera is time not spent reading.
So the cult isn't just aiming at the wrong target, it's degrading the correct ones on the way there.
Let's talk about the Herseth section, because for me, this is the emotional center of the article.
He says every young player should keep a picture of Adolf Herseth in their head, more than 50 years in the principal chair of the Chicago Symphony, arguably the most influential orchestral trumpet player of the 20th century. A sound that could fill Orchestra Hall over 100 players, and could also walk out alone on the opening promenade of Pictures at an Exhibition and simply be the most beautiful thing you'd heard that year.
And Herseth was not a screamer. He didn't need to be. As the article puts it, nobody who ever heard him thought, beautiful, but I wish he'd take it up a fifth.
But here's what actually made that possible. And this is the insight I want people to take away. The man played with such efficiency that the top of the orchestral register was simply available to him. Clean, in tune, in his sound, at any dynamic, on any given Tuesday, at 70 years old.
And Michael Droste argues that is not a smaller achievement than a double C. It's a much larger one. It's the difference between a note you can hit and a register you own.
Own your register. Don't hit notes. If you take one sentence out of this episode, take that one.
So then the practical question, is he saying never work above the staff?
No, and he's explicit about it. He says he's not a monk. Range is useful. It's part of the literature, and expanding it is a completely reasonable long-term project. He's saying build it the way it actually builds, which is slowly, quietly, and mostly downward.
And step 1 is the thing that runs through everything he teaches. Hear it first. You cannot play a note you cannot hear. Sing the note, then buzz it, then play it. If you can't sing an A above the staff with confidence, your body has no idea what you're asking it to do, and it will guess, usually by squeezing.
Ears first. always ears first, then long tones in the middle of the horn at a reasonable volume. He calls it boring and non-negotiable because that's where your sound concept lives, and range is just your sound concept extended.
Then flow studies. Slurred, connected, minimum effort, maximum air. And the point of those is to feel what no resistance actually feels like, so you notice immediately when you start adding it back in.
Then Clark Technical Studies played softly. Not for speed, for efficiency. He says play the second study at a dynamic that embarrasses you, and notice how little effort actually produces a note.
Then descending patterns. Start a half step above your comfortable top note on a good day and slur down. Because approaching from above lets you arrive at the high note without the tension of climbing to it.
Then lip bends. Bend a comfortable note down a half step with the air and the aperture, no valve, and let it come back. That teaches your embouchure what the fine adjustment actually feels like, which is precisely the skill the top of the horn requires.
And then my favorite item on the whole list. Cat Anderson's soft G, top line G, as quietly as you can produce it, for a long time. The man who owned the top of the Ellington Band built his register with the quietest exercise in the literature.
Read that sentence twice, as the article says, and then rest as much as you play, not a suggestion. 4 minutes of playing, 4 minutes with the horn down. The tissue recovers in the rest, not in the reps.
Then the rule, I think, is the single most useful thing in the article. Let the sound be the governor. The moment your sound degrades, you're done with that register for the day. Not one more try. Done. Because every note you play after the sound goes is a note that teaches your body the wrong thing.
And add notes by the month, not by the day. A half step a month is 12 half steps in a year. Do that from a solid high C at 18, and you've got a legitimate, usable, musical high C an octave up before you turn 20.
Nobody chases that timeline because it isn't dramatic.
And it's also the only one that works. Last item on the list, record yourself, and then listen to the whole track, not the high note. Listen to your sound in the staff. Listen to the entrance. Listen to the release, because the recorder is the only honest listener in the room. Your face lies to you constantly about what's actually coming out of the bell.
And that's a good moment to mention the Trumpet Studio app because the practice room has a record yourself feature built exactly for this. You play, you listen back, and you find out what's really happening instead of what you hoped was happening. There's a metronome, a practice timer, and a practice schedule in there too. It's available on the App Store for iPhone, iPad, and Mac.
And if you're already using the app, please take 10 seconds and leave a rating on the App Store. Ratings are what help other players find it, and they genuinely make a difference for an independent developer.
So let's bring it home. Why is range a status symbol in the first place?
Because it's legible. Anybody can hear it, count it, and rank it, including people who don't play the instrument. And that's exactly why it's a poor measure of a player, and exactly why it makes such a compelling cult.
Whereas the status symbols that actually hold up over a career are invisible to outsiders. The contractor who calls you first. The section player who makes everyone around them sound better. The 70-year-old who still has chops because they never spent them foolishly at 20. A ballad that makes a room stop talking.
And the closing line of the article is the one that earns all of it. He's been at this since the mid-1970s. He's made a living, published books, taught hundreds of students, and he still plays. And not $1 of that came from a high F.
Practice your long tones, play in tune, learn the tunes, show up early. The high notes will come quietly on their own schedule as a side effect of doing everything else correctly.
Which is exactly how they were always meant to arrive. If you need the latest practice material, be sure to check out the Ultimate Warm-Up Book for Trumpet and the Ultimate Technical Study for Trumpet. If you're getting ready for the gigging season, Don't forget your copy of The Ultimate Wedding Book for Trumpet.
Thanks for listening, everybody. You can read this article and everything else in the Studio Notes archive at trumpetstudio.com.
Now go practice.